Hey there, and welcome to another deep dive. We like to get right into it here so we can maximize your time. We're tackling something today I know you're interested in, speaking more effectively. You shared some excerpts from It's the Way You Say It. So let's unlock that communication confidence.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive right in. It's funny. What I like about this book is that it kind of acknowledges something a lot of us feel.
Ugh.
Like we aren't just born as these
Yeah.
amazing speakers, right?
Yeah.
But it is a learnable skill,
Mm.
and boy, is the payoff huge. I
Totally.
mean, think about it. Your career, relationships, even feeling comfortable, just like in your own skin, it all comes back to communication.
It really does. And the book is full of these really inspiring stories about regular people. Like, they're not, famous speech coaches or anything. Like, take Elaine, super sharp woman, worked in tech, but kept getting told her voice was too soft.
Oh, really?
And it turned out she worked with this author and everything, and it wasn't even really her volume. It was the perception of it. Like, the company kind of wanted to project a certain image. And so she got this little communication makeover, totally aced her interview, and boom, problem solved.
Wow.
And it just kind of reminds us that how we come across is about so much more than just the words themselves.
That's such a good example, and it makes me think about this. Self-awareness, which the book really emphasizes because a lot of times we just don't know how we sound to others. Have you ever recorded yourself, like, giving a presentation or something?
Oh, it is brutal.
Yeah, and it's so eye-opening.
It is.
You hear yourself one way in your head, and
Totally different, yeah.
totally different.
It's like holding a mirror up to your voice, which can be kind of scary.
Yeah.
And speaking of perceptions, I was thinking about Bruce. Remember that anecdote about the guy who kept tilting his head back when he was talking to people?
Oh, yeah.
And everyone thought he was being so snooty, but it turns out he was just trying to see over his trifocals.
Oh, classic.
But it just shows you how easily body language can be misinterpreted, right?
Oh, 100%. And it's not always about what we intend to communicate. It's how it's received on the other end.
Mhm.
That's why I loved what the author said about speaking in a flat tone.
Yeah.
Even if you're saying, like, perfectly fine words, if you have no intonation, no inflection,
It's all raw.
it's so easy to come across as totally well, unenthusiastic at best, insincere at worst.
Totally. Which segues perfectly into, how we say things matters just as much as what we're saying. Like, the book talked about intonation and how even a simple sentence, something like, I did not want to go,
Oh, yeah.
can sound like you're about ready to punch somebody. Or you could sound like, I was really hoping to stay home and read.
Totally. And the author has a great example in the book about emphasizing every other word. And to the listener, they might hear that as like anger or aggression, when really the speaker's just trying to be extra clear.
Right.
And it just shows how powerful intonation is. Like, you can change the meaning completely, even if the words themselves are totally neutral.
Oh, it's like the difference between like calmly saying no and then just like spitting it out. You're like, no.
Exactly.
But okay, speaking of potentially awkward social situations, the book had some really good advice about small talk, which I know is something a lot of people just dread.
Yes,
Yeah.
small talk gets such a bad rap.
Hmm.
But the author actually makes a really good point. She's like, it's the on-ramp to deeper conversation.
Yeah.
And they even give a framework for it to make it way less daunting. The AR method. Have you heard of that?
CAR method. No, tell me more.
Okay, so RE stands for anchor, reveal, encourage.
Okay.
So first, you anchor the conversation, like you find some shared reality. So maybe you both went to the same conference. Maybe you're fans of the same sports team, anything like that.
Okay.
Then you reveal something about yourself, but it's related to that anchor. So, maybe what you learned at the conference, maybe your favorite player on that team, whatever.
Got it.
And then finally, you encourage further conversation by asking a question related to what you just revealed.
Okay, so instead of that awful silence after nice weather we're having, you actually have a system to keep that conversation going.
Exactly.
I love that. It's like a little secret weapon you can take to, like, those networking events where everybody's just like awkwardly standing around, trying to break the ice. It reminds me of this story. I don't think it was from the book or anything, but it just illustrates this so perfectly about how a well-crafted response can just totally shift the energy of a situation. So picture this. Crowded bus, this guy's on there, and a woman starts giving him a hard time because he accidentally bumped her.
Uh-huh. Oh, I feel like I've heard this.
Yeah.
What do you do? Like, offer to pay for her therapy session?
Even better. He puts his arm around her and goes, now, sugar, how come you gotta talk so mean to me?
Oh, I love that. He totally disarmed her with that response.
Right.
That's masterful.
And it made me think about this whole concept the book talks about, acting as if.
You mean even if you don't feel confident, like projecting that confidence can kind of make it
Yeah.
make it true?
Exactly, like a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. And the book had so many examples of people who completely transformed themselves, but it was all through practice and self-awareness. It's pretty amazing.
One that really stuck with me was this story about, I think her name was Christine, and she was a young girl with cerebral palsy, and she really struggled to keep her mouth closed, which you can imagine impacted not only her speech, but also just like being able to eat comfortably.
Wow, yeah. I don't think I got to that one. So what happened?
Well, the author worked with her on these like very specific exercises and adjustments to her posture, and it helped her gain so much more control. Like it wasn't a quick fix or anything,
Right.
but the results were incredible.
It's amazing how even physical challenges, like they can be addressed with the right approach. And it just shows that, we all have our own hurdles to overcome when it comes to communication,
Yeah.
even if they're not always visible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the
Yeah.
book also talks about like, specific speech patterns that can be, well, less than ideal.
Oh, yeah. Like what? Give me an example.
Well, one that I thought was really interesting was about people who talk too fast,
Yeah.
especially when they're nervous or excited.
Oh my gosh, yes. I am so guilty of this, especially when I'm passionate about something. It's like my brain is going a mile a minute and my mouth just can't keep up.
I hear that.
What does the book say about that?
Well, it emphasizes like the importance of slowing down
Mm.
and enunciating clearly, like the author even suggests, like consciously pausing between your sentences,
Oh, okay.
taking a breath to collect your thoughts.
Oh, okay.
Simple, but can make a world of difference.
I bet.
Yeah.
Because you're just like rapid speech and people are like, whoa, slow down.
Exactly.
Like even if you're saying like the most brilliant thing, it's just too much.
It's too much. They can't even process it.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the opposite, right? The soft talkers, which I'll admit I have struggled with that,
Yeah.
especially when you're in a large group or like a loud environment. It's really hard to project and make sure that you're heard.
Oh, I can relate to that one too. What's the advice there? What does the book say about that?
So it's not just about speaking louder because you can end up just, sounding kind of strained and unnatural, right?
Right.
It's about speaking with more confidence and energy. So
Wow.
like almost practicing with a friend, maybe across the room, and really focusing on projecting your voice, making eye contact, all that.
Okay, so it's almost like you're building those vocal muscles, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And speaking of vocal muscles, the book even gets into like raspy talkers,
Oh, really?
which a lot of times that stems from vocal strain or just like misuse, and even talk about vocal care,
Mm-hmm.
like for professionals who use their voice a lot, teachers, singers, that sort of
I
thing.
never thought about that. But teachers, oh my gosh, that's a workout every day.
It is.
What do they say about that? Like for taking care of your voice?
Well, they emphasize all the basics. Staying hydrated, obviously, avoiding yelling if you can, warming up your voice before you, have to use it for a long time, and even like exercises to help people with raspy voices learn how to speak in a more relaxed way and kind of bringing the voice forward.
Interesting. It's amazing how many different facets of speaking this book gets into. Like it even talked about pitch, how our voices can sound too high or too low.
Yes. And there's a fascinating section about how, like, pitch can be influenced by both physical things, like the size of your vocal cords, but also psychological factors, like your perceived role in a conversation.
Oh, interesting.
Isn't that fascinating?
It's like it's not just about the physical mechanics of our voice. It's also like how we feel
Yeah.
and how we see ourselves, I guess, being perceived.
Exactly. And one of the best takeaways is we have a lot more control over our pitch than we might realize. Like, she gives this great exercise to help you find your optimal pitch, and it involves, like, humming and then matching your tone to a piano key.
Oh.
Yeah. And even just like practicing speaking at different pitch levels just to kind of expand your range and expressiveness.
Okay, so it's like a vocal workout. So we've covered a lot of ground already, from like projecting confidence to even like finding our optimal pitch. Where do we go from here?
Well, the book also dives into the importance of language itself, like specifically vocabulary
Oh.
and how to use, more precise and engaging words.
Oh, that's a good one. Because, I feel like sometimes I fall into these ruts where I'm using the same words over and over and over again. So what kind of advice do they give? Like, how do we actually expand our vocabulary?
Well, she suggests reading widely, playing word games, even keeping like a personal dictionary
Oh, okay.
of new words that you encounter. And she even mentioned this website. I thought this is so cool. It's called freerice.com.
Okay.
And you can learn new words while also helping to feed the hungry.
I love that. It's like expanding your vocabulary and fighting world hunger. Sign me up. But I will say, sometimes, I feel like I get a little self-conscious because I'll use like a big word thinking I sound really smart and it totally backfires. Like I'm trying too hard,
Oh, yeah, for sure. And the book actually addresses that. It's not about just like using the biggest, most impressive words you can find.
Right.
It's about choosing the right words for your audience and the situation.
Okay, so like don't use a bunch of jargon with your grandma
Exactly.
and don't talk to your boss like you'd talk to your best friend.
Exactly. Because the goal is to connect with the person you're talking to, not to alienate them.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
she gives this example of like, how would you explain your job to your mom versus like a potential investor?
Yeah, totally different.
Totally different vocabulary, different examples.
Right. Right. And you want your message to resonate. You don't want it to just like go totally over their heads. You know what I mean? It's like that game Telephone
Yeah.
where you whisper something and it gets completely garbled by the time it gets all the way around.
That's such a good analogy.
Oh.
And speaking of avoiding miscommunication, one thing I really appreciated was the author's emphasis on tailoring your language to the emotional tone of the conversation.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it this way. Let's say your friend is really upset about something.
Yeah.
You wouldn't respond in the same way that you would if they were like super excited and sharing good news, right?
Of course not.
You'd want to adjust your tone and your word choice to match their emotional state.
Right. It's like being empathetic and really reading the room or the conversation, I guess you could say.
Right.
And sometimes it's not just the words we use, but how we respond. Like the book talked about this, avoiding monosyllabic answers.
Yeah.
And even if it's just a yes or no question, like add a phrase or two to kind of soften it or whatever.
Yes. So instead of just saying yes, you can say, yes, that's a great idea. Or
Yeah.
instead of just, no, I'm not free then, but maybe another time, something like that.
Right, right.
Just shows you're engaged and you're interested in continuing the conversation.
It's like greasing the wheels of communication.
Exactly.
Keep it flowing. Now, speaking of keeping things smooth, didn't the book also mention something about graciousness?
Yes.
Like being gracious in your communication.
They emphasize how important that is, even when you're dealing with difficult people or situations.
Oh, so it's about taking the high road even when someone else is, trying to bring you down.
Exactly. It's about choosing your battles
Yeah.
and really trying to respond in a way that reflects well on you, even if the other person isn't doing the same.
Right. It's like that saying, being kind is more important than being right.
Love that.
But how do you do that when somebody's just being a total jerk? Like, what's the advice from the book about how to, like, stay gracious in those moments?
Well, one strategy is to really try to understand where they're coming from,
Okay.
because you never know. Maybe they're having a really bad day, or maybe they're just not great at communicating their needs effectively.
Okay, so a little empathy goes a long way.
Exactly.
But what if somebody's just being, like, straight up rude and disrespectful? Do you just, like, grin and bear it?
Well, not necessarily, because the book also talks about the importance of setting boundaries.
Oh, right.
You can be gracious without being a doormat, right?
Right.
So if someone is consistently crossing a line, it's okay to politely but firmly assert yourself.
You can be kind without being a pushover.
Exactly.
And sometimes, honestly, the best response is like a witty comeback or even just silence.
Oh, yeah.
Like just completely stonewall them.
Sometimes that speaks volumes.
It really does. But speaking of like, those really memorable moments, there was this amazing story in the book about this guy on the bus
Uh-huh.
who totally shut down this rude woman with just the perfect response.
Oh, were you talking about the one where he puts his arm around her and says, "Now, sugar, how come you got to talk so mean to me?"
yeah.
I love that story.
It's such a good story because it's such a brilliant example of using like humor and unexpected kindness. Like he totally diffused that whole situation.
Right. And it speaks to that power of choosing graciousness over aggression,
Yeah.
even when it's hard.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground on like the verbal side of communication, but what about like the nonverbal stuff? Body language, facial expressions, all that.
Oh, the book dives deep into that as well.
Mhm.
And it really stresses how important that nonverbal communication is and how it can either enhance or completely undermine your message, no matter how good your words are.
So you could give like the most amazing presentation,
Yeah,
but if you're like slouching and avoiding eye contact, people are gonna be like, next.
exactly. And they talk about everything: posture, eye contact, facial expressions,
Mm.
gestures, All of it. And how these little cues,
Mhm.
they can make or break your communication.
And I love that the book doesn't just point out the problem, but it gives you solutions too.
Right, like remember Bruce, the guy who kept tilting his head back because of his trifocals?
Oh, yes. The unintentional snob.
Yes. Well, that story just shows how easy it is to misinterpret body language, right?
Yeah.
So the book talks about self-awareness and just like making those little adjustments. They even suggest practicing like good posture by balancing a book on your head.
I love that visual.
Yeah.
I can just imagine like walking around with a book on my head, trying to look all graceful.
Oh, it works.
I know. You're training your body to stand up straight and project confidence.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's eye contact, which the book talks about how crucial that is for building rapport and conveying sincerity. But I get it. For a lot of people, eye contact can be so awkward, especially if you're shy or introverted.
Yeah, it can feel really intense.
It can. But the book has some good advice about how to make it feel more natural.
Okay.
Like instead of staring intensely into someone's eyes, which can be very off-putting,
Yeah, don't do that.
try focusing on one eye at a time. Or, if it feels less intimidating, even practice with, like, pictures of people.
Okay, that's a good tip. I'm going to try that one. What about different cultures, though? Because I know, like, what we think is, like, appropriate eye contact in our culture and other cultures, that could be seen as incredibly rude or aggressive.
Right. That's a great point. And the book addresses that, too. It emphasizes being sensitive to those cultural norms around eye contact.
Mm.
What might be polite and engaging in one culture could be seen as totally the opposite in another.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
It's like that saying, when in Rome.
Exactly.
You've got to be adaptable. Okay, so we talked about body language. We talked about eye contact. What other nonverbal gems does the book offer?
Well, they talk about things like facial expressions and how, like, even a subtle raise of an eyebrow or a slight frown can completely change how our message is perceived.
It's true. Like you could say, oh, that's interesting with a totally straight face, but it can come off as super sarcastic.
Exactly. Or, like, think about when you're trying to show someone you're listening. Like, you're not just nodding your head like a bobblehead.
Yeah.
You're trying to make eye contact, maybe tilt your head to the side, just to show that you're really engaged in what they're saying.
And it's not even always conscious, It's like our body language betrays us sometimes.
Totally does. That's why self-awareness is so key.
Yeah.
And, of course, the book talks about hand gestures, too,
Oh, yeah.
which can be great for emphasizing a point, but you also don't want to be like a hummingbird, like flapping your arms around like crazy.
Right. Nobody wants to be attacked by your hands.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance and using gestures that feel natural and authentic to you.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of really interesting points here about communication, both verbal and nonverbal. But I'm curious, as we start to wrap things up here, is there like one big takeaway, maybe a piece of advice that really stuck with you from the book, something that our listeners could start implementing today to improve their communication skills?
There's so much good stuff in there. But honestly, I think the most powerful message is that it's a process. Like becoming a more confident, articulate communicator, it doesn't happen overnight, right?
It's a journey.
Exactly. And it takes practice and self-awareness and even like a willingness to be a little uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah.
Like put yourself out there, even if you're not sure if you're doing it right.
It's like anything else, the more you practice, the easier it gets.
Exactly. And the book gives you all the tools you need to get started.
Uh-huh.
But ultimately, it's up to you to use them.
Right. You got to put in the work.
You do. But, the rewards are immense because when you can communicate effectively, it impacts every single area of your life.
It really does.
Your relationships, your career,
Mm-hmm.
your ability to just like go out there and get what you want in the world.
It's true. It's like unlocking a superpower or something. So as we wrap up this deep dive into It's the Way You Say It, what's the one thing you would say to encourage our listener, someone who's maybe a little nervous, to put themselves out there and really start working on their communication skills?
I would say be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Like don't get too caught up in being perfect or trying to sound like someone you're not. Just focus on being authentic, on connecting with people, and remember that everyone, and I mean everyone, has room for improvement when it comes to communication. You are not alone.
I love that. Progress over perfection. Right.
Exactly. And just have fun with it. Communication should be enjoyable, not a source of stress and anxiety.
Right. If you're not having fun, what's the point? Okay, so that is it for this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it, and be sure to join us next time for more insightful discussions on topics that matter to you. Until then, keep those communication skills sharp.
Yeah, and it's like with personal space. You know what I mean? What feels comfortable in one culture might be like, whoa, get out of my bubble.
Yeah.
in another one, you
Yeah.
know? So, yeah, it's definitely not one size fits all,
Totally. So nonverbal communication, super important, but you got to read the room, read the person, all that.
for sure. Now, switching gears a bit, one thing the book got into that I thought was really interesting was just how to handle, like, those kind of awkward or difficult communication situations.
Oh, okay. So like when you're at a dinner party and there's that one person who's like a super loud
Yeah.
talker,
Yeah.
or like they keep interrupting you, or like you're just stuck in a conversation that's gone on way too long and you're like, how do I get out of here?
Exactly. Those moments where you're just like,
Yeah.
what do I say? How do I get out of this gracefully?
Yes. I need guidance. What's the book say?
Well, one thing it emphasizes is the importance of staying calm and assertive,
Mm.
even when, like, the other person is being, difficult.
Mhm.
It's about advocating for yourself, but without getting defensive or, getting into an argument.
Mm. Oh, that's hard. Easier said than done, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But do they give you any like specific techniques for that?
They do. Like ways to redirect the conversation, set boundaries, or even just like politely excuse yourself if you're like in a really noisy or distracting environment. So, for example, like if someone keeps interrupting you, you could say something like, hey, I really want to hear your thoughts on that, but could I just finish my point first?
Ooh, I like that.
Right.
You're like standing your ground, but in a way that's not confrontational.
Exactly.
Assertive, but respectful.
Exactly.
Okay, what about like when you're just stuck in a conversation and it feels like it's dragging on forever? Any graceful exit strategies for that?
Yeah. They suggest like having a few kind of go-to phrases in your back pocket.
Hmm.
So you can be like, oh, it's been so nice chatting with you, but I promised myself I would catch up with so-and-so before I left.
Oh, I like that.
Or, I should let you get back to whatever they were doing, but it was great seeing you. Something like that.
Oh, those are good. I'm going to commit those to memory. Right. It's like having like a little toolkit for those awkward moments in life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, one final point I wanted to touch on because I thought this is so fascinating. They actually talk about how our clothing choices can impact how people perceive us.
Oh, interesting. So like dress for success kind of thing.
It's more nuanced than that. It's not about just like, conforming to some rigid dress code. It's about understanding like the unspoken rules of different environments
Hmm.
and then choosing clothing that kind of like aligns with your goals
Hmm.
and how you want to present yourself.
Oh, yeah.
So, obviously how you dress for a business meeting might be very different from how you dress for like a backyard barbecue.
Totally. It's about context.
Exactly.
But it's true. Like even at a backyard barbecue, if you show up in like a three-piece suit, people are gonna be like, what's going on here?
Totally. And they even suggest like having a few kind of conversation pieces
Mm.
in your wardrobe, like maybe it's a unique piece of jewelry or fun tie or something.
Oh, I like that.
That can kind of spark conversation,
Yep.
make you a little more approachable.
It's like giving people an invitation to like come and talk to you.
Exactly.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so wow, we have covered so much ground today. From like the mechanics of how our voices work all the way to like the subtle body language cues and even the power of a well-chosen outfit.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it all comes back to connection, doesn't it?
100%. All of these skills, these techniques we've been discussing, they're really just tools. They're tools to help us connect with other people on a deeper level, to build stronger relationships, and just to communicate our ideas more effectively.
It's like Maya Angelou said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
That's so true. And it's a good reminder to like really bring your empathy and your authenticity and that genuine desire to connect to every interaction.
Yeah, it's not just about the words themselves, it's about the feeling behind them, right? So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive here, what's the one key takeaway that you hope our listener walks away with?
I hope they walk away feeling empowered, like they can take ownership of their voice and their communication style. And, this book gives incredible advice. It's super practical, but ultimately it's up to each person to take that advice, put it into practice, and, make it their own.
Yeah. You can't just like read a book and expect to be a brilliant communicator overnight. It's like learning a new language.
100%.
You can study the grammar, you can memorize all the vocabulary, but the real magic happens when you actually start using it in conversation.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to experiment, make mistakes, figure out what works for you. The most important thing is just to be authentic, be yourself, and keep practicing.
Yeah, because as they say in the book, and this one really stuck with me, it's like every time you open your mouth, you put your business on the street, you're putting yourself out there.
That's right. And when you do that with confidence and clarity and that genuine desire to connect.
Oh, the possibilities are endless.
They are.
That's a great note to end on.
It is.
So to our listener, we hope you found this deep dive into It's the Way You Say It insightful and inspiring, honestly.
Remember, effective communication, it's a journey, it's not a destination. So keep exploring, keep practicing, and keep using that voice to connect with people, inspire them, and really make a difference.
I love it. That is all for this deep dive. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing.